they're set up so it should be kind of off as soon as it needs to be quite close to your mouth, but it should be relatively consistent when it is. So it would be off, 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 off.
So mine is on. Hello. Hello, people. Get your food and get ready. We're starting shortly. Thank you so much for your help.
No worries. I think Lindsay.
No, I think we're doing sliders.
Okay. Oh, if we're just doing that.
I think we're just doing sliders. No worries. Thank you. I'll switch it on.
Okay, right. Yeah. So it'll be on and then it's on.
You ready? Hello, everybody. Hello, good evening. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm completely overwhelmed. I thought, we had a huge dropout maybe, but we haven't, so that's fantastic. Last people helping themselves to food, but I'm going to kick this off. Welcome to the first Research Thing event this year. It's great to be here at Monzo, so thanks to the Monzo crowd. Admin, let's get that out of the way. Bathrooms, ladies there, gents there. If there's a fire alarm, then that means there is a fire. There is a fire, so there's no alarm planned. Preferably leave out of that door, but you could also go for that door if that's nearer. Boring stuff over. How the event's going to work is we have Emma who's going to tweet for the research thing. Our hashtag tonight is hashtag product research. So please do tweet and retweet because we have a lot of people who can't be here who really like to read your tweets. So go for that. Also new, I didn't expect this, we're actually live streaming the event. That's of no use for you. But if you want to tell people that we're live streaming the event, please do so. Our YouTube channel is Research Thing. And I didn't have the chance to tweet that, so if one of you wants to do that, please do so. I guess what we're going to do quickly is we have Samantha, who's lead user researcher here at Monzo, and also Lindsay. Lindsay is over there, who is recruiting user researchers. So do have a chat with her in the break or afterwards. They're going to quickly say a few words. Then we have 3 talks with 4 speakers. Each of the talks is 15 to 20 minutes with a Q&A session afterwards. And we're trying another new thing at this event. We're going to use Slido. Let me just see if I can click. Yeah, so if you have a question for the speaker, type in this URL, slido.do/researchthing. And you will be able to add a question to a list of questions. And you will also be able to like other questions so that those come higher up and maybe get the answer first, because sometimes we won't manage to answer all the questions. We have a short break after the second presentation, so you can have another drink. At the last talk, we then do a bit of networking, so stay around, especially talk to the Monzo recruiting staff. And I guess that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and I'm handing over to Lindsay and Samantha.
Cool. Thank you, Anya. Just to be really clear, the Q&A is after each speaker, so please keep going to the Slido website and add in your questions. You can just access it on your phone, and then you can add the questions that way. Great. Lindsay will say a few words, maybe.
Yeah. Hello, and thank you so much for coming along this evening. As Anya mentioned, I'm Lindsay and I work in the hiring team here. we are hiring lots and lots of roles, but particularly within design and user research. So please speak to us after the event. Anyone in a Monzo t-shirt, Greg and Chris, who you met at the door, or myself and Samantha. And you can add me on LinkedIn as well.
That's it. I'm Samantha, in case that wasn't clear.
Thank you so much, guys. Right. Without further ado, Anna from Babylon Health.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, I'm a little overwhelmed by the size of this audience. And then when Anya said it's streaming as well, I was like, oh my God, there's more. No, I'm really happy to be here today to share a little bit about how we think about fast-paced research at Babylon and how I think about it. And really excited to kind of have some interesting conversations with you afterwards. So as Anya said, I'm Anna, and this evening I thought I would focus on a particular aspect of the kind of research we do at Babylon, which is called concept testing, and I'll explain a bit more about what that means. A little bit more about me. So I was hired as the first user researcher at Babylon a couple of years ago now, and very gratefully we've been able to grow the research function. And before working at Babylon, I worked at a couple of different startups, so fast-paced research is a particular passion of mine, so I'm really excited. So to frame what I mean by concept testing, I thought I would start with a classic double diamond that some of you may be familiar with if you've been working in UX for a while. If you're newbies, then I can give you a quick tour. It's basically the idea that you focus on picking the right problem you're going to solve before you think about what the right solution might be. So the double diamond represents the idea that the diamond shape represents the idea that you kind of ideate really broadly the problems you want to solve, you pick one, and then you really broadly ideate all the new solutions, features that you could build, and you pick one. And usually what happens between the two double diamonds is you come up with a how might we question. So that represents the problem you're trying to solve. Like for Uber, it may be how might we allow friends to split the fare of a cab. Now, ideally, if you're following the double diamond, you want to explore both the problems and the solutions really broadly. You want your diamonds to be nice and wide. But the problem with fast-paced organizations is there's an intense pressure for these diamonds to narrow. At the extreme level, the diamonds are really small, and you're just picking like the first problem you can think of, and then you're picking the first solution that you can think of. So what I want to talk about is in the second diamond, once you understand the problem you're trying to solve, and now you're trying to figure out what the solution might be, how wide is a wide enough diamond? So how widely should you explore all the features and solutions you could build? And what might that look like, and a little bit about what that looks like at Babylon. And just to be clear, so when I talk about concept, I mean like a new feature that's broadly defined, so in terms of what it is and what it does, but it's not a specific UI. So after the double diamond, let's say you pick we're going to bet on this feature, then you might go on and develop the exact UI and exactly what it looks like. When I say concept, I mean we're going to test in general this new feature, the concept of the new feature. I'll work through a specific example, so I think it will be clearer, but the idea is you're picking kind of the kind of feature that you want to explore rather than a specific UI. And just to reinforce this point of like how wide should the diamonds be, we can kind of map it on a spectrum. So if you think on the left-hand side, let's say an organization's trying to move really fast and they just execute like the first concept they can think of. If on the other side you have kind of the paralysis by analysis, like we're going to really explore all the possible concepts for this problem and we're really going to define, kind of do that exploration, really extend that and try to do it thoroughly, the value for the business kind of goes down at either side, right? Because on the left, you're not really intentionally picking the concept, the new feature you're going to pursue. You're just coming up with one and going for it, and you may be missing other good ones. And on the other side, you're obviously not shipping anything to market, so that's no value for the business. So what I want to share is what's like just enough. What's just enough time and space for you to, given a problem, surface, acknowledge, evaluate the different concepts, the different kinds of features or solutions that you could apply to that problem. What does that look like and why? Okay. So I want to propose that what it looks like is a 1-week sprint type structure. And during that sprint, you collaboratively with your team, you're coming up with the concepts that you think matter, but you're testing them. And the gist is that the testing you do is only remote, and it's like a flavor of A/B testing or ABC testing or multivariate testing. So a core part of the sprint is you're going to build prototypes of the concepts, and then you're going to compare them against each other. So let's dig into that a little bit more. So the goal for Monday is for you to understand given that problem, given that how might we statement, what are the problems that you think are most promising, and define how you're going to measure the quality of a concept. So what that looks like is a workshop with your cross-functional team where you all decide on the concepts that are worth exploring. And you as a researcher will be defining screening criteria, tasks, and the kind of data that you're going to collect around that concept. On Tuesday, you're going to start collecting data. So what that means for you as a researcher, again, is you're going to be creating prototypes that embody and bring to life the concepts, and you're going to be pushing these remote studies live. On Wednesday, because your study is live, there's nothing really for you to do, so you can do other work, or you can relax, or whatever you like. And then Thursday is probably one of the best days where you take all the data that you've been able to collect over the last couple of days and you do analysis. And what that usually means is, as a researcher, trying to find focus time to do that in-depth analysis. And it's quite nice if you can do both quant and qual. Again, I'll walk through a specific example, so hopefully that will also highlight some of the quant and qual data you might collect. And if you can get help from another user researcher, that's great. And Friday, we'll be delivering results and trying to figure out what you're going to do, which of these concepts have come out as the most promising from testing. So that will be you as the researcher showing the quant and qual results together and hosting a meeting with the same cross-functional team that you met with on Monday. So to make this a bit more concrete, I'd love to walk through a specific example that's loosely based on some work we do at Babylon. Forgive me if I can't give all the details, but hopefully it'll give enough of a sense. And happy to have more conversations around it later or over drinks. So let's think about Babylon Health, where I work. We have in our app an AI-driven chatbot where if you tell it that you have a symptom, it will ask you a series of questions about that symptom and then deliver information about what might be causing it. But let's imagine we've been doing some research, really exploratory research, and we figure out that actually, in terms of the user state of mind, 50% of people are really not looking for everything that might be causing the symptoms, but they're just looking for reassurance. So they're just looking to know that the symptom will go away, that it's not something serious. So this, how might we question, if you remember the double diamond, that could be the starting point of this concept testing. That's kind of what you've come up with as the problem that you really want to tackle. So on Monday, you'll run a workshop with the cross-functional team. You'll present to that team everything that you understand about the problem. So in this case, it's the idea that actually we haven't really designed for the true need. Most people are actually just seeking reassurance, and we haven't really designed for that. Then you'll do a team ideation session where everyone thinks of features or concepts for how we could tackle this, and you may do a grouping and a voting exercise. And so you and your team will try to figure out which of these concepts are most promising. And what you'll want to look for in this workshop is what are like the 2 to 5 distinct, really different concepts, different kinds of features that you could tackle this problem. And let's assume for this reassurance question, the team come up with these 2 concepts. So the first is just a tone of voice change. So let's assume we won't fundamentally change anything about the chatbot conversation. We'll just change copy. So where we can, we'll express sympathy and we'll try to use kind of reassuring language. The second concept is much more of a harder fundamental change to the chatbot conversation. So let's say the second main concept that comes out of the workshop is, okay, we're actually going to change the conversation so that rather than a user having to go through the long one and get the information at the end, they just have a quick chat with the chatbot where it just asks you the kind of red flag symptoms. It just tries to make sure that it's not anything serious, and that can be a much shorter conversation. So you have two ideas that are two different ways to tackle the need for reassurance, two also very different levels of difficulty to implement, but those are examples of the kinds of concepts that might come out of these workshops. So after the workshop, you, or if you're lucky enough to have another user researcher help you, you'll start to think about study parameters. So how would you go about assessing the concept? How do we know if it's successful in providing reassurance? So you'll need at least a screener, a task that you'll give the participants to do remotely, and a questionnaire, which will be the core of your data collection. Now, a couple of points here to really bear in mind. First, define the participants really carefully. So make sure that they align with the kinds of people who would use your app, both in terms of demographics, but also for us symptoms, their kind of attitudes to health tech, that these are people that would normally use the app. You also want to really, or we do commonly, we really want to understand the emotional experience of this, and especially when we're dealing with reassurance, that's emotional. So for example, you may want to recruit people who've recently actually had a symptom that was causing them worry, because then when they feed back on your prototype, they can reflect on the emotional aspects. When it comes to your task, keep it really open-ended. So you don't want to direct people to, in concept one, we don't want to direct them to the copy in particular. The task should just be them using the prototype and then collecting feedback. When it comes to the questionnaire, if you're comfortable with it, it's quite good to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. So when it comes to quant, this is typically in the form of some Likert scale ratings. And if you can, complement that with some qual. So have a free text question that will then unpack a little bit why the person gave that score for the Likert question. Okay, on to Tuesday. So on Tuesday, you'll want to bring your concepts to life with prototypes. These are the ones the participants in the remote study are going to try. Now, it's fairly important to achieve speed that you equip yourself as a researcher with the tools to be able to create prototypes by yourself. So I can't zoom in too much because I don't want to give too much detail, but these are prototypes that I've made in Landbot. And whatever domain you're working in, it's really handy not to have that dependency on a designer to create it, and again, to just achieve speed. If you're confident enough to try to capture the concept in a prototype, that's great. And remember, a concept is not a UI, so you don't need to be a designer. Oh, thank you. Oh, God. Oh, wait, I can't leave the palm trees. I can't go beyond the palm trees. What was I saying? Something about prototypes. Okay, so it's really handy to achieve speed in this process. That whatever kind of product you're working in, you're fairly comfortable creating the prototype. Again, the UI needs to look decent. Like obviously, if the participants use this and it looks horrendous and nothing like you would see in production, that's not going to work because they're just not going to be able to get into the flow. But if you can equip yourselves with ways to reasonably embody and bring to life the concept, that will help you. So we have the kind of baseline version, which is our current experience. And then now let's think about how we might embody concept one. So we add a question that asks people if they're worried, if they're seeking reassurance. And then as we mentioned, concept one is really just a copy change. So we're not going to change anything else. We're just going to change the copy. So as and where we can, it's reassuring. Concept two is going to be similar. We're going to try to surface the need for reassurance. but we're actually going to fundamentally change the chatbot conversation. So we're actually going to now, rather than asking a bunch of questions and giving an outcome, we're just going to ask about those red flag symptoms that allow us to exclude anything serious. And then you're going to launch your studies. So you create 3 studies. I mentioned that this is a little bit of a bastardized version of an MVT ABC test. So you create 3 versions of the test: the task, the screener, the questionnaire that you had from before. You recruit 20 people into each one. And yes, I am expecting a question on why 20 people, but we'll get there later. And apart from changing the prototype, you use the same study for all 3. And usertesting.com is super good for collecting data really quickly remotely, so would recommend it, but there are obviously other tools or agencies that can help. So Wednesday, the data is being collected, so nothing really for you to do. Maybe you could sit back, have a cup of tea, or probably if you're a user researcher, get on with other projects because you're probably working on multiple ones. And then Thursday is probably the best day because you're doing analysis. So you'll do at least qualitative analysis depending on your comfort level with the quant side. But on the qualitative side, you'll take each of the free text questions that you had in the questionnaire and do thematic analysis. So you literally read them and you tag them by theme. If you've used usertesting.com, you could also watch some of the videos. You get screen recordings. So if you have time, you could watch a random subsample of those. So let's say we took the questions. In the questionnaire, we forgot to point this out, but we asked people their perceived value of the product, and then we asked them why. So let's say this is the question about why, like how could your score be improved? Let's say that on the baseline, people said it was fine, but it was a bit generic. Let's say in concept 1, where we just changed the copy so it sounded more sympathetic, but we didn't fundamentally deliver anything different. People noticed that it just felt like a robot, like trying to be sympathetic, but didn't really do anything about it. And let's say in the second concept, so it was good in that we weren't getting themes around like, this is too generic, or this is just trying to pretend like it cares, but it doesn't. But now users are saying, well, it's not only that I want to discount something serious, I also have conditions in mind. So let's say these are the top themes. What I would say when you're doing the qual analysis is try to seek what's called data saturation. So try to check if by the 20th person in each variant, you feel you're not learning anything new anymore, because that will give you confidence that the 20 people you've recruited, provided your screening criteria were quite well thought through, it'll give you a good signal that you've kind of learned all you could learn. If you still feel by 20 that you're still learning new things, you may need to extend the sprint and you may need to give it more time. Now, if you're confident enough, you could also do some quant analysis. And the reason quant is really helpful is, although it's a bastardized version of an ABC test, it's another signal to give you a sense of the size and the scale of the difference between the variants, which can be really important, especially later when you're doing kind of a cost-benefit analysis and trying to figure out if something's worth doing. So what you will get is, from the Likert scale, a bunch of scores like this. And one of the most basic things you can do, obviously, is calculate the mean. But you shouldn't just rely on the mean. And there is something that's fairly straightforward. It's not too difficult. And it's called a t-test. And there are a lot of really surprisingly easy formulas in Google Sheets, for example. And what that will do is generate a number which gives you a sense of whether there's really a meaningful difference between the variants or if it's just due to chance. So the smaller the number, the better. So I think what this tells us is we can see that concept 2 feels like it's kind of more substantially different to concept 1 and to the baseline than concept 1 and the baseline. So concept 1 and baseline, that figure is quite high, and it can be 1 maximum, so it's quite high. So I think what this tends to suggest is that concept 2 is creating an uplift in scores, and we can be quite confident it's a real difference. So again, user research and industry, we're gamblers, we're not scientists. And this method will allow you to see if there are broadly any like major differences and just help you build confidence in kind of the scale and the nature of that difference. And anyone who wants to get started on quant, I can definitely recommend this book called Measuring the User Experience. I found it super accessible, and anyone who kind of wants to expand their toolkit, that's a goodie. So by Friday, you've tested the concepts. You have at least some qual sense of thematically the pros and cons of each variant, and also potentially quant data. So it's time to present these to your team. And a great way to summarize it is just in a good old table. So you have each concept, you have the quant findings and the qual findings. And what I would really say, again, we're gamblers, we're not scientists, is to not get hung up on any one score or even any one theme, but try to see the big picture of what's being said here. So what is the scale of difference between the variants? What are some of thematically the pros and cons? So let's say that we review this with the team and we decide, okay, next steps are proceed with concept 2, but now we're aware that that concept has a shortcoming, that people not only want to have their symptoms excluded from something serious, but they also want to look up more conditions. So maybe the way we bring that concept to market is we bring it to market V1, we're just excluding anything serious. And with a view to V2 being, okay, now we also unlock the ability for people to say if they have a condition in mind and exclude that condition. And then I think what this tells us is, okay, the tone of voice maybe has a slight difference, although at this scale, the difference is really small. It doesn't do any harm, but let's just understand it has limited impact. So if we can introduce some of that sympathetic language, let's do it. But we're not going to deliver tangible impact with that alone. So, basically, this is the activity, the audit, the review of this table you would do with your team. And that's kind of it. And you may be thinking like, well, hold on, like how does this work with a Google Sprint or some of the other sprint structures you may have worked in? If you think about it, in a lot of those sprints, let's take the Google Sprint, there is usually a critical moment where you figure out the problem you're trying to solve, and then the team decides on what feature, what concept, what type of solution you want to test. And that's usually decided with a dot vote, or there's someone called the decider that will just come in and be like, oh, I want to test that one. What we found at Babylon Health is there is no one who is experienced enough in chatbot conversations around healthcare to make that decision well. So it's worth adding a week where, okay, fair enough, we can dot vote on the concepts we believe in, but we don't hone in on a concept too fast, because the domain that we're working in, the kind of nature of this fast-paced market is no one has the answer, and we're not going to resolve that with a dot vote and or a decider. So giving time and space for this kind of testing to really be able to more empirically and objectively get a sense of directionally which of the concepts work better and why, that's worked much better for us. So that's it from me. In case you haven't noticed, I absolutely love the topic of fast-paced user research. I write a lot about it. I will be writing more about it, and I would love to continue the conversation. So if you're interested in going down the rabbit hole of fast-paced user research, I have a newsletter, and I try to kind of organize discussions around it. And you can sign up at tinyurl.com/10xur, 10x user research. And you can deregister anytime. It's absolutely no pressure, but I would love to be able to share more. Some of the things I'm working on now is how to prioritize your work as the only user researcher at a fast-paced org. And then I'm particularly passionate about merging quant and qual. So one of the other things I'm working on is a little piece on how qualitative researchers can start to learn and leverage quant a bit more. That's it from me. I made it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Sorry. Okay. Did you ever? Okay, wait. Let me read them first and decide if I want to. Okay, so Joe, thank you for your question. Did you ever find that your concept is difficult to? Oh wait, you guys can see it, to evaluate with a kind of prototype. I think sometimes the structure needs to be adapted. So, for example, maybe it's a prototype that you can't test in a couple of days with remote testing. Maybe you really need like a diary study. So you might build kind of different versions of a system and run a diary study over a week. So that will add a few more days. So I think I would challenge yourself to think about ways that you can very quickly capture the essence of your concept and somehow do this kind of comparative testing. It's worked for me in the past as much as I can think of now. Sometimes you may just need to adapt the timescales, or maybe the remote testing won't work as well in some cases. Why not face-to-face research instead of remote testing? Wouldn't you get more reliable? Well, I think actually this is the flavor that each researcher brings to the test. So personally, I like the quant and qual because I find as a gambler, like not a scientist, the quant gives me a sense of the scale of impact and helps me validate if there's a difference. I think with qual, like it's sometimes hard for people to articulate why they like something or why they don't. And I think qual is a little bit more dependent on kind of what you can see and what the participant reports. But I agree that I think if your confidence is in qual and you want to dig into it and you really want to compare the variance in a qualitative way, I think that's perfectly fine. I suppose I would just encourage experimenting with it.
Do you want to take one more?
Okay. Has a question. Yes. Yeah. So, the question, has your cross-functional team workshop on Monday included subject experts? Yes. We have doctors, we have AI scientists. The cross-functional nature of the workshop is super important for two reasons. First, for ideation, just from a purely in terms of the ideation process, having a diverse set of people is important. So in general, if there are any subject experts in your business, try to bring in as many of those domains as possible. And then the second thing is you want to kind of be taking into consideration constraints at the concept ideation phase as well. Like there's no point saying the concept is like a hologram of a doctor that will appear in your lounge and talk to you. Like you should be aiming for something that you could achieve in like a half or a couple of quarters. So I think it's important to have technical people or subject experts that can also constrain the space of the concepts to something that's actually like shippable and reasonable in a couple quarters. Thank you.
One
Thanks,
last
everyone.
round. Thank you. And stick around. You can talk to Anna afterwards, but I'm handing over to Naomi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Naomi. I'm a user researcher here at Monzo. Welcome to our London office. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces in the audience. So, quick show of hands, who in the room is a Monzo user? Not bad, not bad. I mean, I've got to fit a survey in to talk as a researcher, but that could have gone really badly, so big risk. So I've been at Monzo for about 8 months now, and when I joined, it looked a bit like this. We were 350 staff. We had 8 people in the design team, and I was the second researcher to join. Now it looks like this. We're 750 staff, 19, soon to be 21 in the design team, and 3, soon to be 4 researchers. We're growing very quickly, and things change on a weekly basis, just like our product teams. So when I joined, there were 4 product squads. We're now at 13 product squads, and that's changing again over the next couple of weeks. So rapid growth really does mean rapid change, not only to the teams, but also to the products and features that we have, and of course, the growth of our user base as well. When I joined 8 months ago, we were 750,000 users, and as of, I think this week, we're 1.5 million. At the moment, I work here across the 3 main account squads. We have Kasia, our newest member of the team, currently works across growth. She's right here. And Samantha covers a lot of the ad hoc research, as we're short of researchers at the moment, and we are hiring. So because of that, Samantha and I also focus a lot on hiring. I think most of the design team and Monzo people are sat down the front here, so please come and chat to us afterwards if you'd like to know more. But as the number of people at Monzo has increased, so has the demand on our time. And I mean, being in demand, it's a great problem to have, don't get me wrong. In a lot of companies, research really needs to prove itself. But Monzo really does have a user-focused culture. So this evening, I'm going to be talking about the problem that we face as researchers of kind of falling into this trap of research as a service. I'll talk about how we can get out of that and get ahead of our teams, and how we can empower and train those teams in the process of doing so. Can I get another show of hands? Who in this room is a researcher in some shape or form? Okay, amazing. I wasn't sure if you'd all just here to see what Monzo's like, but that's great. So this might be a familiar setup for you. This is a photo of one of my squad rooms during one of our research days. Here I'm conducting some remote user testing using a tool called Lookback, with the squad observing from their team room. It all looks nice and calm, doesn't it? All looks great. The trouble is, when you're working across 3 squads who work to 1-week release cycles, it can be very, very hard to keep up. Not only this, but there's a high demand for research in all areas of the business, not just those squads that we work across. And we can't support every squad at the moment. Hence Samantha being a bit of a floater, and I'm sure she won't mind me calling her that. So how many of you have had a stakeholder come to you and say something like, we're shipping this next week, can we get some user testing on this? Yeah, that's what I thought. So people want research, but they don't always know what they want or why they want it. They don't always understand the difference between user research as a whole and user testing as a specific method. It's kind of just like, we should probably test this, but they don't really know why. And if you keep taking those requests on, you fall into this trap of research as a service, which is when you get stuck in the cycle of user testing after user testing after user testing for your teams. And as a researcher, this is super tempting to do. After all, it's the bread and butter of what we do. It's satisfying to get results quickly, and you can prove impact to the rest of the business instantly. But you can also just feel like you're keeping up with your teams. So stop for a minute. Joe Munko at Microsoft talks about timeless versus disposable research. So you should be thinking about, is this research going to be useful in the long term, or is it going to go in the bin after launch? What are we going to learn about the user here, rather than just the feature or flow that's being tested? So when I first joined Monzo, I did a really big discovery piece of research. I was looking at the archetypes of people that borrow money. And it's still used to this day in the lending team, which is awesome. I always get new starters coming to me being like, can we talk about this? Yeah, great. But the user testing that I did a month ago has faded into the background. Now the design changes have been made and the product's been shipped. So often user testing is disposable. It focuses on those specific flows. So as long as there's no glaringly obvious issues and there are no major risks, why not just ship and then iterate and optimize afterwards? As researchers, we should be prioritizing that timeless work that will help with product direction. We should be focusing on questions like, what should we do next? Or, are we actually doing the right thing? I heard this from a research participant a couple of weeks ago. And it's when you hear things like this that you start to think, maybe we're not doing the right thing. Maybe this actually isn't the right solution after all. And maybe we should have done some more exploratory work back at the start. It's at this point we need to assess what assumptions we made about how this actually fits into people's lives. And we haven't got the user need right when users aren't sure who it is that's benefiting from a feature. And when our mission at Monzo is to make money work for everyone, hearing something like this is quite jarring, of course. Because what's best for users and what's best for Monzo, they aren't mutually exclusive. They should come hand in hand. So I started thinking about what we were looking at. I started to think further than the 3 squads that I work across. And I started to think that we need to understand more about the way people think about money and the problems that they face. And then I was sat in the library downstairs one Friday afternoon. I've got some time in my diary to do a bit of reading if I ever get round to it. And I was reading this. This is Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries by Steve Portigal. And it's absolutely hilarious. I'd really recommend it if you haven't already read it. It's all about when ethnography and contextual inquiry goes a little bit wrong, like your battery's dying on your recording equipment or needing to go to the toilet 2 hours into a 3-hour interview. And I thought, this is what we should be doing, but hopefully without the dead batteries. We need to understand more about how people view money as a whole. And we're missing something by bringing people into a lab to do this. But a project like this is going to be a large-scale exploratory piece and potentially take me away from my squads for a while. And you might get this sort of look if you told your teams that you're going to take a step back to work on a high-level project. So how do I manage to do this bigger piece of discovery research whilst also still supporting their teams in their day-to-day needs? So to start with, it helps to explain the difference between exploratory and evaluative research to them. Exploratory research tends to be broader and deeper, methods like in-depth interviews, whereas that evaluative research tends to be the opposite and includes methods like usability testing. And as a researcher, of course, we cover both. But as we know, they answer different things. Higher-risk product launches need our support on that evaluative research, but maybe those lower-risk launches need it less. But we can't answer questions about user needs by only doing evaluative work or by getting stuck into that user testing cycle and conducting research as a service. And even though we want to make money work for everyone at Monzo, we also need to make money for Monzo, otherwise we won't be here. Exploratory research helps us find features that generate us revenue and features that solve user problems, but endless usability testing won't do that. It's that exploratory research that helps us to get ahead of the teams and start supporting them in that decision-making processes. But what about the user testing, I hear you say? Obviously, this is still an incredibly important part of product development. I'm not saying that should be left behind at all. So what we've been doing is empowering and upskilling our designers and PMs, our product managers, to conduct their own research. So we can spend more time as researchers doing that exploratory work and stay ahead of them. Training colleagues, obviously, is something that can be incredibly time-consuming, but it has massive, massive benefits if done properly. So we've been doing a few things to try and find that balance. We've started running 2-hour workshops to train PMs and the rest of the team in conducting light-touch user research. And to support that training, we've put together our user research toolkit, which is documented in a tool that we use across the business called Notion. It's a bit of a nightmare, but don't tell anyone I said that. And it's a step-by-step guide into conducting research. And part of that is explaining to PMs like the difference between the different types of research. Our focus as researchers should be on the first two, that discovery and design research. But we're empowering our PMs to do that third one, the optimization. That's things like reaching out to users after a product launch through the app or over the phone and just getting some quick feedback from them. We've also got our user research office hours. This is 2 hours a week that teams that don't have a designated user researcher, and that can be anyone, a product squad that doesn't have full-time support, or someone in the people team, someone in the finance team. We've had people from all over the business. They can come to us with anything user research related, be it planning, recruitment, or analysis, and we can give them a hand. We've also created, in Notion again, a user research database. And the insights are available here for anyone in the company to see. And this is everyone's research. This isn't just research done by user researchers. And the idea here is to create this central research brain, so insight can be shared around the business. If someone comes to us and say, have we done any research on this? Check the database. And I know some of you might be a little bit concerned about the quality of work that PMs and designers are doing. I expect that to be a question that comes up. But creating that central hub means we can really keep an eye on the research that's being done by those people. And we can keep an eye on the quality. And we can also support them when we see it coming in if they haven't already come to us proactively. But that hasn't been a problem so far. It's almost the opposite. People come to us with every little thing that they want to test, which they don't necessarily need to. Again, great problem to have. And so because we're upskilling and empowering the designers, it frees us up to do that timeless discovery research, so we can focus on the value of understanding user needs. Again, that's not to say we'll only be doing discovery research from now on. We'll just be spending more time considering the risk of feature launches and the impact that user testing will have on those features before taking on projects. So this is our PMs and designers being super excited. They're excited to find out what we should be building next, and they're excited to work with us on the research too. We're not going away and coming back months later with these findings. They're going to be working with us at every stage. So what's next? So as a research team, we're going to be going out into the field and we're going to be digging into those user needs to figure out what we should be doing next. We'll be hitting all areas of the business with this research, not just those specific squads that we work across at the moment. And this will really, really help us to support and get ahead of those teams. So by taking time to do that timeless research, rather than research that's going to go out of date in a week's time once the product is shipped. So a few takeaways. So just stop for a second, take a step back, and assess whether you are doing that, whether you are providing research as a service. Are you doing that endless usability testing to keep up with the teams that isn't actually uncovering user needs? Make sure that your research is timeless and broad. If you work across multiple teams, which I'm sure a lot of you do, make sure that your research gains insight into more than just that one team. And focus on the user journey with this. It's not about your team goals. You shouldn't be doing research to hit team goals. It's about the user needs at the end of the day. And lastly, upskill and really empower your PMs and designers and the rest of the team to do that disposable optimization research. And try not to be too protective. We all know as researchers we can get a bit protective of other people doing research and of our trade from time to time. So just give them a chance. And as many people have mentioned, we are literally hiring for possibly every role under the sun at the moment. User research, product designers, visual designers, PMs, literally everything. So please come and chat to one of us lovely Monzo folk after the talks. Thank you. Okay. Okay. How do you fit ethnographic research in fast release cycles at Monzo? So I think the purpose of this is really to make sure that the ethnographic research that we do is going to cover everything. Of course, we work to 1 week release cycles, and we could be doing research on a weekly basis. But it's really trying to encourage our PMs, designers, even engineers sometimes, to do some of that research for themselves. As I mentioned, we're not going to be dropping everything and only doing this ethnographic research. We still will be stepping in and helping out our squads. I'll still be working across those squads when we think that there is a need to be had, if we think that there's going to be something that's super high risk. And we don't have a researcher in lending at the moment, but if we had a researcher in lending, I think anything that was launched from lending would have research involved in it. And the designer in the lending team actually at the moment is going to be doing some usability testing next week, I think. There she is. Yeah. So yeah, it's just about trying to find a balance in your time and actually manage your calendar well enough that you can hopefully put some of that stuff aside as well. Who does research operations in a recruitment model like this? Like recruitment. I like recruitment in this model. We do all of our recruitment for the most part. If we need some specialist recruitment doing, so someone that's maybe not a Monzo user, we will reach out to a recruitment agency to do this. But for the most part, it will be internal, me, Samantha, and Kasia that will do the recruitment for everything at the moment. We're hoping to hire maybe someone that can support on this, like a research assistant as well, over soon, hopefully. Do you find PMs carrying out research on their own projects create biases as they are too invested in hearing what they want to? I think there is the potential for that to happen, but something that we do in the training is make people very aware of the cognitive biases that exist as researchers and PMs. So we will, when they've put together potentially like a script, we will go through that and make sure that there's no leading questions. Of course, with any piece of research, there are biases that exist, so we just support them as much as we can to try and make sure that those aren't there. What research repro are you using? What's a repro? Someone explain.
Repository, I think.
Oh, yeah, so we use Notion. So the one, I can't go back. So yeah, it's just Notion. It's a bit of a beast, but it's everything that we use in Monzo is on Notion at the moment. It's all stored in there in a nice little table. How do you prioritize what you research? Is it decided by the user research team or your squad? As a researcher, it's our job to prioritize research. And we will do this based on the squad and the needs that are existing in the squad, but we'll also do that based on the rest of the company and the company goals. We should have enough insight as researchers to know if a piece of research is going to have impact or if it's not, and if it is going to hit those company goals. At the end of the day, it comes back to company goals and where we think the risks are. Yeah, I'll take one more. Do you worry that having non-researchers do research devalues your skill set and makes it look like research is easy and that anyone can do it? And you. Potentially, yes. But I don't think that's the case. I think by proving as a researcher the value of bigger pieces of work, and so our PMs and designers won't be doing all this big exploratory work. They'll be doing that light touch user research. They're not kind of going out into the field and doing 3-hour interviews with users. They're doing the things like chatting on the chat after a launch. So I think potentially, but I also think it helps to highlight what we do, and they actually see the value in what we do as researchers by upskilling themselves. They say, oh, actually, this is much harder than I thought to ask questions that aren't leading and that aren't biased. So potentially both, but hopefully more for the positive rather than the negative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay. Before we go into the last really, really good talk, you should have another drink, and I'll shout you all together again in like 10, 15 minutes. So mingle, have a drink, and if you want to talk to the previous speakers, dare and come to the front row. Struan, Melissa. Ah. Okay, guys, do you want to get another drink and slowly get back to your seats? I just found my speakers again. I was looking for you. It will probably be a couple of minutes before people sit down, but yeah. I'm going to shift these guys away. Do you want to talk again? Okay, everybody, grab your drink. Our last speakers are ready. I could actually name it, but that would be a bit cheeky. Yeah. You want to take this one already? This is already on.
This is on.
Okay, everybody. I'm handing over to Melissa and Struan.
Thank you. Ooh. Thank you for sticking around for our talk. We're Struan.
And I'm Melissa.
And we work in the user research team at Deliveroo. So when we were thinking about this topic of user research in a fast-paced organization, we were thinking about qualities that make research strong, I guess, in our organization. And three we came back to were when it's anticipatory, when research kind of adapts to the environment around it, and when research can offer reflection for the company. So we talk about that today. And I wanted to start with a kind of story. Last summer, I was doing a project which involved interviewing customers in their homes. So I was going up to Glasgow with a colleague of mine. We had 2 interviews in the evening. And we had this plan. We were going to go on the train in the morning. We'd go up on the train and have about 3 hours before the interviews. We'd kind of chill out in the hotel and do a bit of work on the discussion guide, things like this. Relax. The plan kind of... Oh, yeah, there's one more thing. There's a bike in this story as well. My colleague's a really keen cyclist, so she brought her bike and wanted to go cycling in Scotland for a day. Yeah, so the reality of the situation obviously wasn't that. The plan kind of unraveled as soon as we started. We got on the train and the conductor started checking our tickets and said that there were high winds in the north of England. It was really likely the train was going to get delayed, possibly terminated. So I kind of jump into plan B mode, and we have this booking system you can book travel through. So I jump on this and I start looking for a car I can hire, basically in the north of England. Here the train's going to get terminated, so I book this car quickly in Preston, and I tell my colleague when we get there, like, meet me at this roundabout near the M6, and I'll come and pick you up in this car. It's all going to be fine. Jump in a taxi to the car place, and this is what I find when I get there. So there's a fighter jet outside, and there's like a big fence as well, and a big security checkpoint. And I go up to the man and say, like, okay, what is this place? And he tells me I've hired a car from a BAE Systems secure facility. These guys make like fighter jets and things like this. So I'm not getting this car. I jump back in the taxi. I go to the roundabout. I get my colleague's bike in the car. The taxi driver at this point is being trying to be helpful. He's telling me, like, if I pay him £500 in cash, he's going to drive me to Glasgow all the way, which I politely turned down. We go to another car hire place, at which point I realize I don't have the documents. You actually need to hire a car or pick up the car. So I'm off to a bank to go and get a proof of address. And then when we do get the car, it is the smallest car I've ever seen. Like, so there's all this equipment. There's like camera equipment. There's everything we needed for like this 2 or 3 days in Glasgow. And my colleague's bike kind of hitting me on the back of the head. So I'm driving this thing. And we're kind of burning up the M6 as fast as possible. The car wouldn't be able to speed if I tried. But we had about 3 hours to get to an interview that was in about 2.5 hours. So we do arrive. It was fine. I kind of remember having about 30 seconds to switch the car off and then kind of get into interview mode and try and like slow down and stop being in complete panic. Yeah, and so I then did like 4 hours of back-to-back interviews, which were technically really poor, but I guess you know, the context of seeing someone eat in their own home and interviewing them in that way, it's really valuable for us. You know, it was also very time sensitive work. Like, this wasn't stuff that we could delay and kind of say, you know, would you be able to do it in a couple of days' time? We had to get there for this. Okay, so like, why did we talk about this story? Why do we start with this? Well, coming back to these, I guess I talked about them as strengths of research in a fast-paced organization. Well, we had kind of anticipated that like travel's complicated, we might need the extra time. So we'd planned that in at the beginning. And with that contingency and some of the resources we had at hand, you could come up with a plan B. We could adapt on the fly, and the B, and then it was like a plan C and then a plan D after that. Yeah, and I guess part of what I think about good research is, you know, it's about learning from your mistakes as well. Like, in reflection, the bike was a really bad idea. I wouldn't let someone bring one again.
So as user researchers, I think we're always anticipating some element of change when we're doing research in the field and when we're planning research. Maybe not the amount of changes that Stuart encountered, but some kind of element of change. For example, when you're planning a discussion guide, you're always kind of making allowances in your timings for if things overrun, or you're ready to adapt the conversation if the customer comes out with, customer or participant comes out with something unexpected. And when we were thinking about doing research in fast-moving product companies, we were thinking that it's not, when you're working in a kind of fast-paced environment, it's not just the work that's moving fast, it's also the pace of change around you. So we felt that these qualities also help you adapt and do, you know, great user research in this context too. So before we go any further, I should probably explain a little bit about what Deliveroo is and how we're set up, because I think that plays a big role in how we're able to adapt to changes. So Deliveroo is a food delivery company that delivers restaurant and takeaway food to customers in over 200 cities in 14 different markets now. And that means we operate in a kind of marketplace model where we have our three main users are consumers, riders, and restaurants. And our tech teams are set up around that. So we have three main product groups building for these three users and like 22 different product teams within that. And as researchers, we work in an embedded model. So similar to what Naomi was explaining before, we work in a multidisciplinary team with like software engineers, PMs, and so on. And the really great thing about this is that it allows us to really move with the problem. So continually doing research in the same space allows us to build up a real kind of expertise in that area, really getting to know our users and their behaviors and their needs, as well as like the wider context that influences that part of the product. But we also believe in occasionally switching teams too. So that's a bit contradictory, but like why we do this is partly because there's like 22 teams and there's only 11 researchers at the moment. But it also means that we're kind of faced with really difficult, not really difficult, but kind of challenging decisions about which teams actually need research the most. And it means that as researchers, we're always working on like highest leverage things. So in my time at Deliveroo, I think I've been here for 2.5 years. And in that time, I've worked with teams in the consumer space, the rider space, and now kind of in the customer service space. And the really great thing about switching between teams is that you bring with you all of that kind of deep embedded knowledge that you've acquired from working in one team with you to the next team, and you help that team who's usually been focused on a very specific set of goals and set of users, and you help them kind of consider a different perspective and think about the impacts that the work they're doing is having on a different set of users in a different part of the product.
Yeah, so to, I guess, like touch back on some of the stuff Melissa said, what for us, in the way we think about how we position user research and the value user research offers to the company, we're trying to position around change being a constant. We know that the organization is always going to be shifting. Like the problems that we research are changing, even though we might develop expertise in those areas, they're still developing over time. We're also kind of creating change with the products we ship. We're instigating the change itself. And the organization is changing around us. Like in the last 2 years, the growth has been kind of like really fast, basically, and there's lots of new people and new ways of working as well. So broad context kind of lets us see, like that's what we're searching for, basically, broad context on all of this stuff, and trying to make sure that we're positioned in a way that we can add the most value, even if that means like switching teams at points. And then this idea of moving with a problem, like moving with a problem promotes continual adaptation. It kind of forces you to adapt your methods as the problem's changing around you, and also, I guess, adapt, I suppose, to the organizational change Melissa talked about. Be open to it and see it as a positive. And then in terms of reflection, the researchers provide product teams with a reflective voice. One of the things we were talking about was that sometimes in a fast-paced organization, the focus is on the now, and for us as researchers, it's on a longer time horizon. We're trying to look back at what we've done before and also forward to where we're going, and provide that broader, more reflective perspective to the team. Yeah, and things like switching teams and embedding, they're mechanisms we use to develop this. Yeah, so we touched on team structure and the role of user research, how we try and like position ourselves around constant change. But we also think these values of like adaptability, anticipatory work, and reflection influence the way we do research projects themselves. Yeah, and each of the 3 projects we're going to talk about, I guess they dial one of these things up or down a bit more. It's not that all projects deliver on all 3 of these promises.
Cool. So now we're going to give some examples of some of the projects we've been working on and how we apply these things we've just been talking about. So, wow, that pizza looks really big on the screen. So that's obviously not a good delivery experience. Hopefully not many of you in the crowd have had this happen to you with your pizza. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, just in case there's quite a lot of you, so let's not go into that. And working in the customer service space, this is like one of the things that we're like really focused on, and thinking about one of the problems that we have to think about is, you know, how we can improve this experience when it does happen. Like, what can we do to rescue experiences like this? So fairly recently, we were thinking about this problem and thinking about what the kind of ideal kind of compensation or resolution a customer should be offered when a bad thing happens. And the team wanted to take a more of an experimental scientific approach to this problem. So we were looking to offer different groups of customers different forms of compensation, and then looking at metrics like retention over time to see whether the customers are actually coming back after all these different variables. And because I'm part of the team and part of all these discussions, one of the things that kind of came to mind was that retention alone wasn't really going to give us the answer on whether customers were actually happier with these different kinds of compensation types. And so, so in this case, what I did was I really wanted user research to provide value to the experiment. So what we did here was set up a really brief kind of feedback survey. The customers could, in the experiment, could answer and give a bit more information on their experience and what happened. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I wanted to have customer stories alongside the experiment results so that we could look at these two in parallel and get a real holistic sense of whether changing the compensation amounts kind of meaningfully impacted these negative experiences customers were having. And yeah, after reading through like lots and lots of really angry customer comments, it really helped me convince and like speak to the team about a more like holistic view on kind of how different compensation affects those experiences. And the second example that we're going to share with you is a piece of research along a similar theme of working alongside data. So this project was sparked by a piece of work that the data science team produced, which found that there was basically a pattern in consumer behavior that changed depending on whether you joined the platform in 2015, 2016, 2017. And at the time, this piece of work was gathering a lot of momentum internally, and there was a lot of eyes on this piece of work and a lot of theories floating around as like what might be causing this. But there was no real conclusive signs in the data that would explain, you know, why this is happening. So again, it's a really good example of where user research can really add value. But as a team, we knew that if we didn't produce something fast and a piece of work that was exploratory enough and robust enough within a short period of time, then we were going to miss our opportunity to take part in this conversation. And instead, one of these kind of like assumptions or theories is going to take hold, and yeah, not good. So for this project, we kind of temporarily disembedded from that embedded model that we described earlier. And we did 60 customer interviews in a space of 3 days, which is exhausting. But it was really necessary in that particular context. It's not something that we've done since then, but it was it was important because of like the kind of high priority nature of that question. And so in this example, it wasn't something that we could have anticipated because it was instigated from the data science team. So it wasn't something that was like we saw coming. But the fact that the team is more like adaptable and flexible than perhaps some other teams and able to quickly pause what they were doing and jump onto a different project, it meant that we were able to react quickly. And the interesting thing about this study is that it remains kind of like a point of reference for the team even today. So I think Naomi earlier was speaking about how we want to aim to do research that doesn't have like a short shelf life and can be used and like referred back to over time. And I think this study, when we were first kind of designing it, could have easily been one of those like short shelf life studies because it was answering a very specific problem and a very specific piece of analysis. But actually, because of the type of question it was, because of the fact that it was interviewing customers that had joined in 2015, 2016, 2017, and their behaviors, it means that it's a piece of work that we can still reflect back on today when we speak to customers that have joined more recently and compare like the patterns of behaviors and how they've changed over time. So yeah, all of the 3 sweaty days in the lab were worth it in the end.
Cheers. Yeah, and one more. So this was actually one of the first projects I did when I joined Deliveroo, and I was working in the Rider team at the time. We were about to launch a product that it was to replace a third-party system that we'd previously been using, and we were building a bespoke solution. But the product played quite an important role in the rider's experience of work. So when we're changing stuff in this space, we want to be very careful that we understand all of the effects that we're causing. So what we designed was a longitudinal study. This is a study format where we chose to pick a panel of 8 riders, and we interviewed those 8 riders once a week for a period of 8 weeks around the launch. So 2 weeks before and then 6 weeks after. And the stuff on the right-hand side here is kind of how we presented some of that data. We were interviewing them, so we were doing some in-depth interviews and then tracking some kind of key metrics. And also sentiment on a weekly basis. And that's kind of what you see visualized. I think what's interesting about this in the context of fast-paced research is it's a, by definition, slow-moving method. You can't speed the longitudinal study up. It's planned for a period of time. So it has some costs and benefits. The costs being, like our organization has an attention economy. People focus on a problem for a certain period of time. And especially around a launch, lots of people are focused on things. Once the launch has happened and the experiment that we run alongside that launch has kind of reached significance, lots of those people also move on to new problems, which is great. That's what needs to happen. In this case, the study carries on though, and so some of our stakeholders, I guess, drop off as we move through a study like this. There's lots of energy at the beginning of the study, and then we were kind of speaking to a smaller and smaller group over time. And after the study, we have 8 weeks of data to analyze, which takes a long time to do as well. But then on the pro side, we had also got a very fast feedback loop going. So we had these interviews on a weekly basis that we could basically collect the team's questions and build a discussion guide around it really fast, and then kind of report back on progress in about 48 hours. And those interviews we had at the end, they also offered an opportunity for us to kind of pivot the study slightly. We already had the time with the riders set up. So instead of doing in-depth interviews towards the end, we started to do concept testing and usability testing with that time instead. That was the wrong direction. So slow moving doesn't necessarily mean unsuitable in a fast moving context. One of the things one of the reasons we chose a longitudinal study was because we anticipated change over time, and this is the type of study that can catch that. And what we found was riders initially kind of struggled with the change in some instances, and then that effect dissipated over time. We could measure it. And that insight as well, I think definitely changed the way I think about a product launch in that space. Like we now anticipate that there will be a period of adjustment when we launch something. And then, I guess adapting the focus, even though maybe we traded off some of the rigor of the study, it was a positive trade-off in the end. So not being being pragmatic rather than precious, basically, about what we're working on. And in terms of reflection or like research as a reflective function for the business, in this case, a longer study better reflected the user's perspective. We were researching around a product that riders use on a week-to-week basis. They live with for a long period of time. So that short snapshot around a launch, which we might get from an experiment, for instance, wasn't necessarily representative of all perspectives. So when we make an assessment based about the success of the kind of launch itself, we can do so using data which reflects different viewpoints. Cool. So I guess to kind of try and sum up everything we've talked about, we think of like when research works well in a fast-paced organization, it's kind of anticipating the problems the organization might be experiencing. It's kind of trying to be one step ahead. And some of the things that we try and do to get ahead, I guess, are things like switching teams and building that broad context and seeing things from lots of different viewpoints within the organization ourselves to put the pieces together. But also trying to ensure we have a degree of space to explore problems and not necessarily coming at everything with a very tactical question, but also kind of opening ourselves up to a problem space, which is the kind of, I guess, the freedom you get with something like a longitudinal study where you're watching something for a period of time. And then in terms of adaptation, so we kind of structure the team to be ready to adapt to changes in the organization. And try and adapt our methods to new questions and new focuses. So, Melissa talked about the importance of experimentation, which has been a big shift in the organization over the last year, and how we try and bring kind of quant and qual alongside that. And bring pragmatic, not precious, ultimately. That's what's important for us. And then research is this reflective function for the organization, or a reflective voice. I talked about thinking in a slightly different time horizon and trying to put the historical and the future next to the present as well. And also moving regularly and having that kind of switching between teams, but also embedding, gives you a good amount of context to push a team to try and have a reflective conversation and think about the direction in which a decision pushes the product in the long term. Thank you. We would love to take questions. Yeah, sorry about that. We're constantly looking to expand to different areas.
Vote for your area, and then we'll eventually expand.
I think we have a feature in the app where you could request.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, you can vote for your area.
Do you want to take this one?
60 people in 3 days. How? So I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but we pulled everybody from their what they were working on. So there was like 6 of us. And then, it was just really long days. I don't know how else to explain it. We kind of paired off into teams of 2, and we took whatever that is each, like 20 each, and just, interview after interview after interview. And then at the end of it, we all reserved 3 days, I guess, in our calendars, and spent that time just like heads down working as a group to really focus on that problem and come up with answers as a group.
Yeah, the reason for the 60 as well was because we had these 3 kind of subgroups within it. We wanted a large amount of, we want a large study within each of those subgroups, so that we could see kind of trends within those as well. So the number was important, and also with the kind of eyes on the project, it's just important to have like a robust argument for what we were coming to say, because everybody else was coming to the table with a similarly robust argument. Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah.
How do your PMs collaborate to improve the product for all 3 user types, not just their target users? I think actually, I'd like to think research plays a big role in that, in trying to be the person who is making PMs, like we're responsible for making our PMs aware of things that are going on elsewhere within the organization. There's definitely more and more structure that allows them to kind of see what's going on globally as well. And this isn't something I would say we struggle with too much. But there's definitely a situation for us with that triangle we showed before, where what's right for one user and what's right for one team isn't necessarily right for another one. So we do have to be very kind of cognizant and conscious of that dynamic of like a marketplace and users that might have opposing needs.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the other good things about our team relative to other kind of teams within our user research team, relative to other teams in the business, is that we spend a lot of time catching up as a group and syncing up on what each other are working on. So I think that's another good opportunity we have to bounce these kind of product changes off each other and sense check whether any of this stuff is going to affect another user in another part of the product.
Do you want to take Ethno in other countries?
Oh, you can
do we do Ethno in other countries? We do a bit of, yeah. I guess like we tend to do, if we're doing stuff in other countries, like we now try and do a good component of our work in other countries because we're in 14 markets. So if we continue to test in the UK, we bias the products towards the UK and the needs of the UK. And yeah, we'll tend to work with interpreters, moderators, simultaneous interpreters is how I've done it previously. Yeah. Observational work we've done probably less of, but most of the stuff we're doing internationally is interview based, I would say.
Working with data scientists, what do they do and how does that differ from overlap and complements UX research? I think data science is a lot more focused on kind of patterns in the data as well as like experimentation, but also product usage. So I think more and more we try and work in partnership with them. So a good example of that would be if something is coming up in the research, going back to a data scientist and explaining that to them and seeing if they can find a way to look in the data and see how big of a problem that is on like a bigger scale. As well as if they're working on an experiment, as long as we have visibility over that, we can see, like an example I gave earlier, where user research can add value and where it's best to just kind of sit back and look at the data itself.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is we now have kind of two streams of data scientists, like one which sits within the product team and is kind of runs like an analyst role, and another where some of the algos that we're working on, where our products are algorithms basically, in some instances, those data scientists are working on the design of the algorithms, so we can work closely with them to try and understand what might help them, like what kind of user insights might help them make the kind of day-to-day decisions of their job as well. So it's not, it's kind of definitely a two-way conversation between data scientists and researchers, and not something, it's something I would say we're kind of trying to put quite a lot of effort into at the moment, especially with the increased focus on experimentation and an experimental mentality to product development.
Okay.
We don't actually have, all of our research team is based in the UK. So when we work with people internationally, we're doing so with partner agencies and with translators and interpreters that are either within the networks of people that we have worked with previously or that we kind of feel fit the bill for the work we're doing.
Yeah.
Should we do one more? We'll do one more.
Okay.
Not all teams have user researchers. On what basis do the other teams make design decisions? There might be like a designer on a team where a user researcher isn't in some instances. And there's also, we have a role that's kind of like a lead role. We have a group called CRD, Content Research and Design. And across a group, that lead would have visibility and be in conversations that we're not necessarily in. And they would be making recommendations about when is the right time to put somebody from a design or a research role into the mix of a product team itself.
Because even though we're embedded, it's not so fixed. So I'm kind of embedded within two teams at the moment. But if there was a need in another part of the business, and then it would be perfectly reasonable for me to jump over and work with them and work alongside them. So it's not like, we kind of flex.
Super happy to take more questions afterwards if you come and find us.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. if you or your company wants to sponsor a research thing, come and talk to me. If you have an interesting talk that's research related, come and talk to me. And yeah, for anything else, have another drink and talk to the lovely people at Monzo and give them a last round of applause for Monzo and all the speakers. Thank you.